Welcome back to USA Daily Report. I'm Colonel Douglas MacGregor. Ladies and gentlemen, in politics and war, there is a familiar paradox. When everything suddenly goes quiet, it is rarely a sign of peace. More often, it is the moment just before history reverses course. Iran today, from the outside, appears to be entering a calmer phase. The streets look more sunlit than before. Protests seem less dense. And the authorities keep broadcasting soothing messages wrapped in rationalizations. But history has shown that regimes rarely collapse amid thunderous chants. They more often begin to crack inside a suspicious, unnatural silence. What is worth reflecting on is that this time, the warning bell is not ringing from Tehran squares. It is coming from the sky. When European airlines are willing to detour around areas that were once dangerous battlefields just to avoid an airspace that is supposedly safe, the question is no longer simply whether Iran is stable, but how unstable the situation inside must be for even the sky to feel dangerously uncertain. On the surface, things may look temporarily patched together, but like a structure already showing cracks at its foundation, the danger is not in the noise above, but in the silent fractures within. A government may be able to suppress protests, but it is far harder to suppress the fear of those who are clinging to power. When elites begin preparing an exit route, when assets, gold, dollars, and passports are packed before luggage, the question is no longer whether a rupture will happen, but what form it will take. Inside Iran, protests may be temporarily pressed down, but they have not ended. Outside, military and diplomatic pressure continues to intensify. Along the country's edges, armed organizations are beginning to act openly. Overhead, military signals are growing denser by the day. All of this is assembling into a picture that forces a difficult question. Is this merely a temporary crisis or the opening stage of a systemic shift? And in today's video, we will analyze each layer of that picture to determine whether Iran's calm is a sign of genuine control or only a brief pause before an extreme storm suddenly strikes. Dear listeners and viewers, from the outside, Iran appears to be entering a quieter period after protests were violently suppressed. While the public still has not secured even minimal rights to pursue freedom and basic well-being. But if anyone truly believes the region has stabilized, that optimism may be dangerously misplaced. Because the real warning bell is sounding not only on the ground, but also from the sky. On the 16th of this month, the European Union Aviation Safety Agency issued an urgent alert calling on European airlines to conduct strict risk assessments when flying through Iranian airspace. At the same time, Iran's air defense forces were reportedly placed on high combat readiness, preparing for the possibility of military action from the United States. What is notable is that even after Iran announced its airspace had reopened, many European carriers still chose to fly around, preferring a longer route over Afghanistan, a region once considered a battlefield, rather than risking a direct flight over Iran. That detail points to a sobering conclusion. Iran's current crisis is not a short-term incident. It is a prolonged danger with no clear exit. The crackdown has not ended. The stench of blood and violence still lingers. Even clearer proof is that public protests in Iran show no real sign of ending. The Ali Khamenei system continues its harsh repression. To respond to the protest wave, Iranian authorities have deployed unofficial security forces in major cities, dispersed crowds, sealed off university campuses, and tightened control across the streets. At the same time, Iran imposed an internet shutdown lasting more than a week, leaving communication nearly paralyzed nationwide. Severe crackdowns were recorded mainly on the 8th and 9th of the month, when the government first cut nationwide connectivity, then deployed armed forces to suppress protesters. According to multiple unofficial sources, the death toll may have reached tens of thousands, possibly even higher. What followed suggests the degree of fracture within the power apparatus itself. Recently, an Iranian woman called into a Persian language radio program abroad and publicly accused her own father. She said her father was a member of the forces suppressing civilians and had close ties to senior leadership within Iran's security system. According to her account, these officers were both directly participating in the repression and quietly preparing escape routes. They were arranging passports, hiding hard currency, and staying ready to flee at any moment. The woman said she herself had been arrested for joining protests. She alleged that her father exploited his power to get her released, then beat her with a baton to force her into silence. She declared that her father is a criminal and said she was willing to testify before the International Criminal Court. She also claimed to possess recordings and related evidence. Within just 48 hours, the next wave of leaked information caused even more shock. Multiple sources reported that Iran's elite are quietly moving assets abroad using cryptocurrency, with total value estimated at $1.5 billion. These illicit flows are said to be concentrated toward Dubai. There are even claims that the son of a figure among Iran's top leadership personally transferred an enormous sum and then quickly left the country in search of a safe haven. Analysts point out that to sustain repression, the Iranian authorities have deliberately isolated security forces from society. In particular, special units have reportedly been confined long-term to bases or military zones with minimal contact with ordinary citizens. During this period, they are continuously fed propaganda and subjected to systematic indoctrination. In the eyes of these armed forces, protesters are portrayed as agents of foreign intelligence services, especially the United States, and the government labels them with tags such as reactionary, saboteur, enemies of religion, and enemies of the Islamic system's so-called core values, and so on. These claims spread rapidly on social media, raising a major question: is Iran's leadership beginning to withdraw from within? And as separatist organizations appear, the movement is being pushed toward armed resistance. Against the backdrop of prolonged instability, a particularly notable development has emerged. A Kurdish separatist armed organization commonly known for opposing the central government announced it had carried out multiple attacks targeting Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The group said it inflicted damage at several locations inside Iranian territory, describing this as direct retaliation for domestic repression. According to the group's representatives, recent attacks in western Iran damaged security facilities in certain small towns. This is the first time since the protest wave erupted that an opposition armed organization has openly admitted conducting organized attacks inside Iran and emphasized that these operations were launched from within the country, not from outside the borders. The group also did not rule out cross-border attacks against Iranian bases in Iraq. Around the same time, another Kurdish armed organization also claimed it killed multiple IRGC members as armed groups begin to emerge and act more openly. That typically indicates a harsh reality. The central state's authority and legitimacy are being seriously eroded. The United States may be pausing temporarily, but military deterrence remains ready. Although recent signs suggest that the United States and President Trump may be temporarily postponing direct military punitive strikes against Iran, postponement does not mean deterrence has ended. Many experts argue this is only a brief lull before a larger storm. As the risk of escalation rises, the United States is said to have activated military deployment options, including moving the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln and another carrier, reportedly named USS George Bush, into waters near Iran. The U.S. Air Force has also increased reconnaissance activities and strategic movements. Some analysts suggest that the possibility of a U.S. strike has been prepared in advance. On the 17th of this month, European security agencies advised airlines to stay away from Iranian airspace. In practice, most international flights have already avoided the area. But what drew particular public attention is that at this extremely sensitive time, 2 aircraft were observed entering Iranian airspace. According to some reports, the flights originated from China, fueling suspicion about emergency assistance linked to a military alliance. Many voices argue that behind regimes that violently repress their people, there is often a shadow of Beijing's strategic backing. Previously, President Trump publicly declared that those who suppress protesters would pay a price. Soon after, the U.S. government officially announced a new round of sanctions targeting Iran, listing 11 individuals and 13 entities. Notably, the list includes senior government officials and local commanders of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, especially in places accused of severe violence against protesters. The message from Washington is unmistakable. Every action is being watched, and there will be consequences. Also, on the 17th of this month, President Donald Trump again spoke out, assigning responsibility to the Iranian authorities for casualties resulting from domestic repression. He stressed that Tehran would bear full responsibility for all consequences and warned of strong reactions if Iran continued to cross red lines. The same day, the Pentagon said it had received intelligence reports indicating Iran was developing attack plans targeting U.S. interests. U.S. military officials warned that any attack would trigger severe retaliation, emphasizing that Washington's resolve should not be tested. Military signals on the ground are also becoming denser. U.S. drones have been recorded flying patrol routes described as unusual over waters near Iran's coast. International media also reported that a large number of U.S. military aircraft, including fighter jets, strike aircraft, and aerial refueling planes, are being moved toward the Middle East. In addition, the U.S. Navy has conducted broad force repositioning. Military experts assess that when logistics, resupply, and long-term deployment begin appearing simultaneously, this is no longer mere posturing. Either Washington is preparing for a worse scenario or attempting to generate sufficient pressure to prevent escalation from slipping beyond control. According to analysts in Washington, Iran has become one of the priority targets in U.S. security strategy, cited as being accused of violating international law. Military strike options at this time are said to be postponed, not removed. Continued U.S. deployments indicate Washington seeks to ensure rapid response capability if the regional situation suddenly deteriorates. Before the storm, the sky is often calm. So who is really steering Iran's fate? From inside Iran, sources say the capital, Tehran, appears relatively quiet, especially over weekends, with no large-scale protests recorded. However, residents report frequently hearing drones operating over the city. Some reports accuse security forces of using incapacitating weapons or devices that temporarily restrict protesters' movement. The use of such tools against civilians is viewed by many international organizations as a serious violation of humanitarian norms banned globally since 1925. These allegations could become a political rationale for Washington to act more quickly. Meanwhile, Iran's state media says arrests continue to rise. Iran's prosecutor general Mohammad Movahedi Azad has on one hand rejected earlier U.S. accusations as fabricated, while on the other hand asserting that authorities are handling rioters quickly and effectively, with many cases already sent to trial. Monitoring organizations report that internet connectivity in Iran has improved only slightly, reaching just a small fraction of normal levels. A limited number of people abroad have been able to reestablish contact with sources inside the country. However, information control remains extremely tight. International internet monitoring and censorship watchdogs warn that Iranian authorities are planning to completely restructure how citizens connect to the outside world. Under this plan, international internet access could be converted into a state-controlled system rather than an open space as before. Many experts believe this could become a long-term restriction, potentially even permanent. It is expected to be completed after 2026. According to disclosures from technical personnel involved in this model, only individuals or organizations deemed trustworthy by the government would be allowed true international internet access. The rest of the population would be limited to a domestic intranet, isolated from the outside world, and placed under tight state surveillance. Analysts argue this is not merely a temporary information control measure, but a long-term effort to maintain power as the situation becomes increasingly difficult to manage. International analyses also point out that the deeper cause behind Iran's prolonged instability is the combination of international sanctions and internal governance weaknesses. The leadership's room to maneuver is shrinking. To resolve economic, political, and social problems at the root, Tehran would be forced to change its system or, at minimum, adopt a short-term de-escalation approach by softening its stance and accepting certain compromises especially in how it treats its citizens and on key issues tied to the international community. One observer compared the situation to a rope stretched to its absolute limit. Each time one flashpoint is stamped out, the rope wears a little more until it can no longer hold. Dear listeners and viewers, as experts have noted, Iran does not look like a country collapsing instantly. It looks more like a structure stretched far beyond tolerance. On the outside, everything still stands, it still functions. There are still people guarding it, but inside, the joints are coming loose. And the most alarming thing is not the loudness of resistance, but the prolonged silence under strain. History can be deeply ironic, but in a way, no one dares to laugh. The current Iranian government may be able to control the streets, control the internet, even control the atmosphere of fear. But the hardest thing to control is the psychology of those in power. When belief begins to shake, when escape routes are calculated more carefully than reform, when dollars, gold, passports, and their temporary owners are preparing to leave, that is no longer strength. It is the mark of decay. Iran's story also reflects a rule that may sound old but never becomes outdated. The longer dialogue is delayed, the higher the price paid through confrontation. The more force is used to freeze a problem, the more terrifying the cost will be when the ice melts. Violence may prolong a current grip on power for a while, but it never builds a future. Iran may not collapse today, it may not be tomorrow either. But like a rope stretched to the breaking threshold, it does not need more force to snap, only more time. And in stories like this, time rarely stands with rigidity. Thank you for accompanying USA Daily Report, where we do not merely listen to the headlines, but reflect on what is quietly shaping the world ahead. If today's video has not delivered a neat, simple answer about Iran's political situation and instead leaves a few more questions worth contemplating, then perhaps we are seeing history in the way it truly moves. Not rushed, not simple, but always carrying lessons. Colonel Douglas MacGregor respectfully bids you farewell, wishing everyone a peaceful evening amid an increasingly turbulent world.